how can I continue to practice and keep fresh all of the different Qigong practices that I know? I'm saying this is for you as well, of course. That's going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. All right, so Qigong is a fascinating art, practice, science, discipline, however you want to refer to it, thing to explore and to understand. And within that, there's many, many, many different practices that you might choose to explore and learn, might really enjoy. Each of the practices bring uh, different understanding to different principles that lie behind the Qigong, because they focus on different things and therefore have different benefits as well. And so it's really beneficial to learn a whole range of different practices too. And so I actually made a vlog about this in one of the fairly recent ones, sometime in the last few weeks, about why it's beneficial to actually learn lots of different Qigong practices. So I'll put a link to that vlog in the description below. You might like to refer back to that one. And again, so you get different benefits from them, but it can also just be a matter of curiosity. Oh, wow, this one's fascinating. I want to explore that. This one's fascinating. And I think, curiosity can be a great thing too. But as you learn more and more different Qigong practices, there starts to be a question of like, wow, how do I actually maintain all of these? There's so many. I did, again, another vlog a little while ago about how to choose what to practice, during your regular practice sessions, if you do know a lot of practices. So again, I'll maybe put a link to that one in the description below as well. This is a somewhat different topic in terms of like, okay, I've learned all of these. How do I maintain them? How do I make sure I don't forget them or forget some of the nuance, some of the detail in these practices, if that's my focus, rather than just like what's good for me on a particular day or particular week or month or season or whatever it might be. And part of this can be that you do find that there are different seasons for different practices, where you find like, hey, that one really fits at this time, this one really fits at another time. And so you can naturally cycle through them and go, okay, I'm going to put this one aside for now, but I know I'm going to pick it up later on at a particular time when I feel like that's really relevant. And you can choose different times when you focus on the different practices. Now, when I say seasons, that can mean like the seasons of our environment: winter, spring, summer, late summer, autumn, right? You can tie it in with that. But also seasons can also mean like times within patterns of your activity. So it's not necessarily tied to those seasons, but there's a different context for season. Like it might mean, it might relate to, when you're on holiday, you have more time, or maybe you're in a different environment and it's really nice to do, a particular type of practice. For example, some of the practices where you really put a lot of focus on connecting to nature. Maybe when you're on holiday, you have better opportunities to connect to nature. So you're like, hey, when I'm holiday, I do a lot of these practices. I don't necessarily do so much as some of the other ones, but it's a great opportunity to do some of those. It could also be, let's see, for example, with physical seasons, in winter. Winter, it's it's good to be indoors more in winter, and maybe it's not so easy to be out and about doing different things. And so you might focus more on some of the practices where they don't require as much moving around, because there's some, like a lot of practices you can do just standing in one place. It doesn't take a lot of room. But there are some practices where actually you want a bit of space. Qigong walking's a good one. You want to go for a walk while you do it, or some of the animal play where you want a bit of room, ideally, to be able to move around. Maybe when you're indoors in winter, that's not so suitable. So you focus more on breath work, on meditations, on maybe Zhangzhuan practices where you're just in a still posture. You can do it in a small space, and this also harmonizes with what's going on in the environment around you, because these are practices that have more of an internal focus that help you to maintain your energy. They can have parts of them which are involved, relate to releasing energy too, but they have overall, something that harmonizes with the season of winter, and so on. And so you might find amongst that you naturally find a pattern of like, okay, I've got all these different practices. I know this one fits nicely at this time when I'm at holiday or when I'm at work or whatever it is. This one fits nicely in summer. This one fits nicely, and so on. And you can have a routine through the year where you spend time focusing on different practices. You can also choose other ways as ways to keep them fresh. And I think this relates more to, because ideally with our Qigong practice, we want to focus on what's most relevant to us at a given time and, harmonizing with what's going on around us. But there can sometimes be a different motivation, which is more just like, okay, I'm just wanting to make sure I maintain this and keep it fresh. And that's valid, right? That's worthwhile too. And this, I think, applies more when you're in the early to intermediate phases of your practice with different practices. Because that's when you're more likely to maybe not fully have grasped all of the details and nuance of the practice, and so your understanding is a little bit more precarious, and there's more chance that if you leave it for a long time that you might come back to it and go like, oh goodness, I've forgotten some of this. Whereas once you've done those practices for a long time, and maybe revisited them multiple times for various reasons, much less likely that you're going to forget details. But rather that, certainly when you revisit them, there might be fresh insight and things that come out, but you're not really going to have forgotten the insights that you've already got. And so in that instance, you might choose just a more regular sort of pattern of like making sure you cycle through different practices while you're still letting them sink in, still letting them consolidate. Because ideally when you learn a new practice, it can be fine to just sample, try a new practice and try it out and go, oh, that was fun, that was nice, but maybe not take it any further. That's fine. But if you really want to learn a practice, it's good initially to spend some time really spending time with that practice, going into it so you really understand, really appreciate it, before then moving on and focusing on other things. But even after that, you might have like, okay, you've got a fairly good understanding experience of it, but you might be like, actually, I do need to keep doing this periodically to allow my understanding to deepen further. And so there's different ways you could do this. You could do something like, I don't know, it depends how many different practices you know that you want to keep working on, keep fresh. Maybe you've got 4 different practices that are, quite different from each other. Yeah, and maybe some of them you can combine them together, but let's say each of these practices, like it's only practical for you to do one of them at a time, with just the amount of time and focus and energy that you have. You've got 4 different practices. Well, you could do something like spend 1 week focusing on one practice. So each month, 1 week focusing on one week focusing on the next, 1 week focusing on the next, 1 week focusing on the next. So each month you're spending a week on each practice. Great way to still be deepening into it, keeping those fresh. You could also do this other ways. It could be that you spend longer. It's like 1 month on 1 month on another, 1 month on another one, and rotate through them. It could also be that within your practice, for example, you are really adapting your practice to specific needs that you have or things going on around you, and most of the time that's what your practice focuses on. And so 7 days in a week, maybe 5 days in the week, you are just focusing on things that are particularly relevant to you at that time. But then on 1 or 2 of those days, you again make a point to rotate through and refresh your memory, refresh your knowledge or experience of different practices that you're wanting to keep fresh and wanting to just gradually develop and deepen into a little bit, over time. So lots of different ways that you can do this. I know to begin with, when you're learning all these different things, and it can seem overwhelming because you think like, oh, you kind of maybe have a sense that you need to practice them all the time. And that's really not the case. You can think of your Qigong practices in many ways. An analogy I often use is like food. because you know how to cook a whole lot of different dishes and things, doesn't mean you try to cook them every day and eat them every day. Like that would be a disaster, right? You might spend time focusing, and cook one dish regularly for a while you're like perfecting it, getting really good at it. But then after that, you'll develop different patterns and routines of bringing different, cooking different dishes at different, sometimes on a regular basis during the week. Maybe one day of the week you cook one thing, another day you cook another thing. You might do that. But equally in different seasons, you're like, oh, now's the time that I cook more soups and stews. Now's the time that I make more salads. Now's the time maybe for special events that you make more desserts and you bring some of those recipes out, and you can cycle through them in different ways. It doesn't mean that you have to do them all at the same time. It's the same with our Qigong practices. We do want to spend a time sinking into them so we really understand them, but then fitting them into our lives. And that doesn't mean that we have to forget about anything. It can be that we intentionally cycle through and refresh our memory while still focusing on, what's best for us overall in our practice. Anyway, hopefully that's useful for some of you who've maybe wondered about this with where you're at in your practice. Maybe you've learnt some practices and you're learning some more and you're starting to think, how can I maintain all these? Maybe this is just a useful bit of, hopefully reasonably common sense perspective on that you can apply to your Qigong practice. Okay, I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.